We ready to get them in? And, oh, never fails. And who's your next witness?
Matthew Reeves.
Okay. Do you have any others past him for today? No? Okay, that's what I thought. All right. How are we looking for time for next week? We're looking all right? I mean, we're going to make it by the end of the week?
I think so. I can give you a very good idea by Monday, I think.
Okay.
Because I've spoken to all of our experts, all of our
Have,
questions.
did you just tell me about Dr. Foley today?
Yeah, we just,
Yeah.
Karina?
Yeah.
What was the message on Dr. Foley?
Make sure you read it.
Thank you. Jurors in the courtroom, Your Honor. Jurors may be seated. Jurors are present and accounted for.
Thank you, Deputy. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Were you all able to abide by my instructions during the recess?
Yes.
All right, then we will get started again. Mr. Michaels?
Yes, Judge. Defense calls Matthew Reeves.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you shall give in this call shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Mr. Michaels.
Please state your name,
Matthew J. Reeves.
and how are you related to Curtis Reeves
He's my father.
and Vivian Reeves?
Yes, mother.
Tell me what you do for a living.
Work for the Tampa Police Department.
For how long now?
Next month will be 19 years.
What is your current assignment?
Currently assigned to patrol, and I'm also a member of the bomb squad.
And prior to that, were you in the military?
Yes, sir.
For how long?
6 years, U.S. Air Force.
And did you have any clearances?
Yes, sir. My duties required me to have a top secret SCI clearance.
And from what year to what year were you in the Air Force?
It would have been 1995 through 2001.
Now, we're going to talk about January 13th, 2014. Before we get there, let's talk about a hunting trip you went on with your father right before that, okay?
Yes, sir.
Tell me about that hunting trip. Where was it?
It would have been up in North Florida, Panhandle area.
And I don't hunt, so I'm going to ask you some questions about it. How does that go? Do you arrange to go there? How do you end up going to North Florida hunt? Or you just go there and turn off the road and walk into the woods?
This was a paid hunt that included a clubhouse for a location to stay. You're paying for a certain time frame, a couple days to hunt on their private property. So we basically had a house to stay in, and then we went out and found where we wanted to hunt within the property and hunted.
And were there other people staying in this house?
There was a couple other gentlemen, yes.
And so is this, when I think of a lodge, I think about, like in the movies, like a big log cabin with a big fire roaring and people in smoking jackets. Is that what it's like?
We were on cots in just a large open room.
Okay. And so this was in North Florida. Where was it in North Florida?
I don't recall the town.
Okay. And so what was the time period you paid for?
A few days, can't recall how many exactly.
And tell me, what are you hunting for?
Either deer or hogs.
And so how do you go about doing that? Do you shoot them? Do you use a bow and arrow? What were you using to hunt then?
This was we were only hunting archery in this trip.
All right, archery, that means bow and arrow?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And so you went with your father?
Yes,
Did you all drive up there?
yes,
Who drove?
I did.
And so tell me a little bit about the preparation for the trip. It's archery, so tell me about your father. Did he use a bow at that time?
Yes, sir.
And what sort of bow did he use at the time?
He had both a recurve, which is traditional, and he also had a compound bow.
And what's a recurve bow?
A recurve has no wheels on the ends of it. It's more of a traditional, there's no sights on the bow or anything.
Like in the movies Robin Hood?
Yes, sir.
A big bow like that?
Yes.
And what's the other bow? Compound? What is
Compound bow. It drops the poundage as you draw it back. So as you draw back, the poundage would be a let off of a certain percentage of what the overall weight of the pull would be.
All right, I'm not sure I understand what that means. Let me ask you, does that mean it's easier to use than the first bow you talked about?
It has sights, and it's the equivalent of, say, a 50% let-off compound bow would be a 50-pound bow. Once you pull it back, you're only holding back 25 pounds instead of the full 50 pounds.
All right. So once you pull it back in terms of holding, I know it's not called a string. What is that called?
Well, the string, yes.
Oh, it is, okay. So you're holding back that part of the bow where you put the arrow into, right, to aim
Yes, sir.
at your target.
Yes.
And so when you're holding it, it's a little easier to hold on that compound bow than the other one.
Yes, sir.
And so in this particular hunting trip, what sort of bow did your father use?
He was using a Matthews compound bow.
And what is the significance of that Matthews compound bow?
I had previously set the bow up for him. It was a newer bow that he had purchased, and when I set it up at a lot lower weight than his previous bow.
All right. And so that means it would be easier to pull back
Yes, sir.
and easier to hold once it is back.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, leading up to the trip, do you practice? What do you do to prepare for the trip besides packing?
We generally tried to practice multiple times a week leading up to a trip like that.
And practice means shooting arrows?
Yes.
And where do you practice for this?
Either his backyard or my backyard.
Right. And how do you go about practicing?
We have targets, and we would essentially shoot anywhere from a few dozen arrows into those targets at different ranges.
Okay, and what do the targets look like? They look like animals, or are they sacks? What are
Bags or like a block.
Okay. Now, leading up to this trip, did you and your dad practice? In other words, shoot arrows in the backyard?
Occasionally. He'd practice on his own a lot of times, and I would practice on my own a lot.
But did you practice with him sometime?
Yes.
Now, when you practice with him, how many arrows would he shoot at a time?
When we were getting ready for the trip, he wouldn't shoot more than maybe a dozen.
Okay. And before that, did he shoot more at a time?
We used to shoot a couple dozen arrows at a time in practice.
Okay. Do you think that sometimes he only shot maybe 2 or 3 at a time?
As we came closer to the trip, yes.
Okay. And so tell me about that. Was he unable, or tell me why he only would shoot 2 or 3, if you know?
Leading up to the trip, he contacted me about finding out the legality of him using a crossbow.
All right, let's talk about that for a second. A crossbow is, again, I can only go by the movies. Is it one of those things that it looks like a little rifle with a bow on top?
Yes, sir.
All right, and so that's one that you load up and you just pull the trigger,
Yes, sir.
and then the arrow goes?
Yes.
All right. And so you looked into that, would you agree with me, because it was easier, a lot easier to use than the compound bow?
Yes, sir.
And so you did that at your father's request?
Yes.
Now, let me ask you about the trip itself. So you drive up there. Tell me what happens once you drive up there. Do you wake up early the next morning? Do you go out that night, or are you allowed to hunt at night? I mean, I don't know.
We can't hunt at night. I don't recall what we did on the very first day, but it would have been scouting basically to scout out a place to hunt on the first available time we had.
All right, tell me what that means, scouting.
We'll go look into an area and just see if we see signs for a deer. Basically like a little short day hike, walk into the woods, get a look around, find an area that we deem where we would like to sit.
Okay. Now, I know the prosecutor's going to ask you, so let me ask you ahead of time, how far do you walk into the woods with your father?
Maybe 100 yards.
All right, so you're not out there like a half a day or something like that?
No, sir, there were roads throughout the property.
I'm sorry?
There were roads throughout the property.
And so are you describing that you could get in your truck and drive up the road, pick a spot, and then walk into the woods 100 yards?
Yes, sir.
And that's how you would look for a place?
Yes, sir.
And when you say you look for a place, I imagine, again, I'm not a hunter, I guess you look for like animal scat, I guess they call it, right? That sort of thing, or?
With deer, you're usually looking for tracks, what's called a scrape and what's called a rub, and trails.
All right. So you're looking at the ground and looking at the trees to see if deer had passed there, that sort of thing.
Yes, sir.
Now, how do you hunt? I know Mr. Martin knows about, stalking, this and that, and I heard that term. So,
I have an objection to the gratuitous comments regarding counsel and also its continuing leading. I've let it go a little bit to get the flow going, but we need to have correct
All right, let's curb the leading, sustained as to the leading.
let me ask you this. Are there several ways to hunt during that trip?
Primarily ways to hunt whitetail, especially in Florida, is going to be either sitting in a blind
All
or
right, let
in
me
a
talk about that.
tree stand.
Sitting in a blind, that's one way, right?
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry, is that one way?
Yes.
Tell me what that means, sitting in a blind.
You can either carry out what looks like a tent that has windows, set that up, and then you just sit in a chair inside it.
All right.
You
And
can-
so you're sitting there waiting for a deer to pass.
Yes, sir.
That's a blind. What's another way of hunting?
You also could make up a blind out of just brush, like down limbs and tree limbs and stuff, and just sit up in there wearing camouflage.
Okay. Again, waiting for a deer to pass?
Yes, sir.
What's another way?
A tree stand.
Okay. Now, how does a tree stand work?
We use a climbing stand, and you're climbing up into a tree to get an elevated position.
When you say climbing the tree, I'm imagining that you're putting spikes on your feet like a lineman on the telephone pole and lifting yourself up. Tell me, is that how it works?
No, sir.
How does it work?
The way we use is what's called a climbing tree stand. It has two pieces, and once they're attached to the tree, once you get into the stand and you put a safety harness on the tree, you move like an inchworm, kind of. You stand up, and then you just sit down, and it'll move up maybe an inch or a couple inches at a time.
Okay, so the way I understand it is if this is the tree, there are two pieces to this tree stand.
Yes, sir.
They both go around the tree.
Yes.
One piece is here where you would sit. Is
Yes.
that right?
Yes, sir.
And then the other piece is is on the ground that your feet go into?
Yes.
All right. And so do you sit down then on the piece that's here by the back of your legs?
Yes.
And then you just inch I can't do both legs, I'll fall down, but if you inch them both up like this?
Yes.
Okay, and then it catches onto the tree, does it?
Yes, sir.
And then you stand up, and now you're up a little higher.
Yes.
Okay, and so you do that, like you said, like an inchworm until you get to whatever height you want.
Yes, sir.
What other ways were your options to hunt on that particular trip?
Those are the only two ways we hunted on that trip.
All right. Now, tell me about your dad. You've already told us that he's using a bow that's easier to use. Did I have that right?
Yes, sir.
And do I also have right that you've adjusted it so it would make it even easier to use?
I would object to the rehashing of the testimony.
Your Honor, in order to put it into context, I think
It's a
State
summary
calls
of
it
the
looping.
Testimony, just, it's not appropriate.
All right, I'll overrule, but be mindful, please.
Okay. And so, you have the bow. How does your father hunt on that particular trip? In other words, is it blind or tree stand, or both?
He only hunted in the tree stand one time. Every other time was out of a blind.
All right, let's talk about that. So on that trip, which was right before January 13th of 2014, is it true that your father got up in a tree stand?
One time, yes.
All right. Now, did he go up the way you described on one of those tree stands, inch by inch?
Yes, sir.
Now, I guess because your feet have to lift the bottom part up, is that bottom piece heavy?
The whole stand, both pieces together, are only 18 to 19 pounds.
And that's the part you sit on as well as the other part together?
Yes, sir.
And so your father used the tree stand. How high up did he go into the tree?
The tree that I placed the stand on could only go about 10 feet up due to he only went about 10 feet off the ground. He was unable to go any higher.
And when you say unable, was that because of the tree?
He only did it the one day, but he was unable to go very high as it was anyways.
And that's because he just couldn't do it?
I don't know.
Okay. Before I imagine you've been hunting with your dad since you were a little boy.
Yes, sir.
I imagine you've seen your father go up into a tree stand many times since you were a little boy.
Yes, sir.
Is 10 feet the usual height he would hunt at?
No, sir.
How high up would he go when he was younger?
We both would generally go up anywhere from 20 to 30 feet up.
Now, let's talk about the other way. You said there's a blind.
Yes, sir.
In this, at that last hunting trip, what sort of blind was it?
It kind of like a tent that pops open.
And who carried that into the woods?
I carried it into the woods.
Now, when you hunted, for instance, when your dad was on the tree stand, how far were you from the road?
Within 100 yards.
And so, is it that you drive your truck from the camp or the lodge to the area that you're going to walk into the woods?
Yes, sir.
Is that what you did?
Yes.
And when you hunted on the blind, did your father carry the blind into the woods?
I carried it
And why did you carry it?
to help him out. He was carrying his bow. I carried the blind.
All right. In the past, when you were younger, did your dad carry the blind into the woods himself?
He would have carried all his own equipment.
Now, during that trip, did your father, I guess the terminology is harvest, did he kill anything?
No, sir.
Okay. And did you?
Yes, sir.
A deer?
Yes.
Now, tell me about that. I'm imagining that if you harvest a deer in the woods, that now somehow you have to get it back out to your truck. Do I have that right?
Yes, sir.
Do you have some kind of cart or something you pull it on?
No, sir.
You have to drag it out.
A drag.
And when you harvested your deer, did you drag him out of the woods?
Yes.
Did your father help you?
No, sir.
Have you seen him in the past be able to do that?
The last time that he had killed a deer, he drug it out and hurt himself.
And how long ago was that before this trip?
Probably 5-6 years before this trip.
And since then, have you always helped him
Yes.
take a deer out of the woods?
Yes.
Now, let's talk a little bit about January 13th of 2014, okay? Did you have plans with your mom and dad to go see a matinee that day?
Not prior to the day of.
So tell me, how are the plans made?
They contacted me, I don't remember, by text or phone, and asked if I wanted to attend the Lone Survivor movie with them.
Okay, and was that something you were interested in, going with your mom and dad to watch a matinee,
Yes.
to see that movie?
Yes, I've read the book.
Okay, and so now, as you decide to go, what are the plans? You're going to go with them?
I'll meet them there.
And what were you doing that you couldn't go with them?
I was cleaning up my truck from the hunting trip and also getting, just since we had been gone for a week, and getting my outside work done at my house.
If you're gone, if it's only a couple days trip, how are you gone for a week?
I can't recall the exact time frame, but being gone, it's just me that lives at my house, so there was chores that needed to be done.
All right, so your recollection is either a couple days or a week. Do I have that right?
Yes, sir.
Now, when you get back home, you are plans to meet your mom and dad at the theater. What happens then? You wash your truck? Do you actually go over to the theater?
Yes, I drove there.
Okay. Now, when you drive to the theater, are your parents already there? Do you know?
I was running late.
So the plan was to meet them there?
Yes, sir.
At what time?
I don't recall the exact time of the movie.
Was it sometime before the movie was to start?
It was just, I knew what time it was starting, and I was supposed to be there at that time.
Now, did your mom or dad tell you where they were going to be sitting, I mean?
I didn't know anything leading up to it, because I had already turned my phone on silent and things, because I was running late, so I'd already put it on silent, so I didn't know where they were at. I didn't learn that till afterwards, that I'd received a text
All right. and
later
that's-
in the day.
Okay, I understand. So going there and actually getting to the theater, you didn't look at your phone, agree with me or not, to know that they had texted you to tell you where they were sitting?
Yes, sir, I never looked at it.
And so, if I may, Your Honor, I'd like to get the State's Exhibit number 5. May I approach the clerk?
Yes.
May I approach Matthew Reeves, please?
You may.
Showing you something that's been marked and accepted into evidence as a State's Exhibit 5. Do you recognize that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And is that an accurate depiction of what you remember?
Yes, sir.
Now, you, I guess, to get in the theater, you had to buy your ticket.
Yes.
So did you buy a ticket?
Yes, sir.
And where did you go once you bought your ticket at the ticket booth in front?
Straight into the theater.
So no concession stands or anything else?
No, sir.
And so, Your Honor, may I have the witness step down so we can show the exhibit, maybe help him better explain?
Sure.
Step down, please.
You
May I step over by the veil?
you may. Go ahead. I'm going to stay here. I can,
You've seen the photo.
I have.
I know, Your Honor. Please, Mr. Reeves. All right. That was kind of a small picture. So, tell me, when you walk in the theater, this is theater number 10. Does it look like theater number 10 to you?
Yes, sir.
The same theater you walked into that day?
Yes, sir.
Tell me where you would come in. There looks like some stairs. Would you agree with me there?
Yes, if you're facing this, over here on the left side, it comes in below a wall. You're coming in at the bottom, coming in on this left side and around the corner, and then onto the stairs leading up.
All right. So do you agree with me when you walk into those doors that say theater number 10, you're kind of going down a ramp?
Yes, sir.
And then when you turn the corner, you go actually into the theater and go up the stairs?
Yes, you're at the bottom, down just off of this picture.
All right. Now, when you get into the theater itself, what is going on in the theater? Are there previews playing?
Yes,
Tell me what the lighting conditions were like in that theater.
nearly pitch black.
Now, when you say nearly pitch black, could you see, for instance, people within a few feet of you?
Yes, sir.
Did you look around the theater to see where your mom and dad were?
Yes.
And could you see them?
No.
Where were you approximately when you turned around to look?
When I came around the end of the wall at the bottom here, I took one step up and was looking to see where they might be, but I was unable to see due to the lighting.
And when you got there, soon after, did the preview start to play, or were they playing when you got there?
One started to come on as I started looking for them.
All right. And so what did you do once that preview came on?
Most of the people in the theater were paying attention to the preview. I didn't want to interrupt, and I was interested in the preview. It was for the remake of the RoboCop movie, so I turned and faced the screen and watched the preview.
Okay, and can you see where you were approximately?
I would have been off of this picture on the right around the base of the steps or the first step up.
So you'd be more towards the front of the theater than this shows,
Yes, sir.
than where the steps show here?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And so the previews play, they're playing, you're watching them, do you hear anything unusual?
Not till after the preview is over.
We're going to talk about that. And so after the preview is over with, what do you do?
I turned back up. It got extremely dark because the screen went dark again. At that point, I turned and took my attention back to trying to find my parents.
And so did you turn around on the stairs?
Yes, sir.
And did you look into the theater?
Yeah, I object leading.
I said, did you? It calls for a yes or no answer, Your Honor.
I didn't
Yes.
hear that. So overruled if that was the
So
case.
did you look at the theater to see if you could see where you were
Yes.
at? And did you see them at that time?
No.
And again, were you all the way down or were you moving up?
I took like 2 steps up.
And now at some point, do you hear something?
Yes.
Tell me what it is that you hear.
I heard my dad say something to the extent of, "Get out of my face" or "Get off of me."
Okay, let's talk about that for a second. Number one, when you heard that, was that in between the previews?
Yes.
So the second preview hadn't started yet, do you agree with that?
Yes, sir.
Now, when you heard that, how did you recognize the voice?
It's my father. I've known his voice my whole life.
And when you heard it, what was the tone of the voice?
It's alarming.
Did it alarm you?
Yes.
Could you tell where the voice was coming from on this photo, generally speaking?
Somewhere up in the back section in the middle.
Okay, could you tell which row it was?
No, sir.
When you heard your father's voice cry out, did you turn to look?
Yes.
All right, and what area did you look in?
Up into the middle back section.
Now, at that point, were the previews playing or were they still off?
They were off.
And what were the lighting conditions?
Now, at that point, it was nearly pitch black, so.
Now, when you looked back into the back row, did you see anything?
Initially, no.
Okay, so did you see anybody standing, for instance?
Not at the initial, when I initially looked, I couldn't, it was too dark.
That's what we're talking about now. Now, at some point, do you start moving towards that voice?
Yes.
When do you do that?
I had started stepping up the steps while looking up into the back area.
When you heard the voice, you said it alarmed you. Did that cause you now to go towards where you heard it or not?
I had worked my way up the stairs. This was all happening at the same time when I heard it.
Okay. And so what's the next thing that happens?
The gunshot, and I see the flash and the silhouette of a person standing.
Now, let's talk about that. When you heard the gunshot, you said you saw the flash. So which direction were you facing?
I was facing up towards the back.
Now, when you said you heard the gunshot, did you also see a flash?
Yes, not the muzzle flash, but just the residual flash.
And what does that mean?
A muzzle flash would have a very distinct, bright, burning, you'd see an actual flame. I was just seeing a general flash.
And was there something that was blocking perhaps your view of seeing that?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and what did you see?
A person standing.
Could you tell who that was?
At the time, no.
Did it appear to be a silhouette to you?
Yes.
Okay, you couldn't really make out any features, is that fair to say?
Yes, sir.
Now, what happens once you hear the gunshot? May I have the witness return to stand?
Yes.
Please sit down. What happens once you see this residual flash? It sounds like a light. Is that what that means?
Yes, sir.
And you hear the gunshot. You recognize it as a gunshot?
Yes, sir.
And that's because of your training, is it?
Yes, sir.
And your experience with firearms, is that true?
Yes, sir.
Now, once you hear and see that, what's the next thing that you see? You've described to me a silhouette, just so we know where we're at here. this residual flash, what's the very next thing you observe with your eyes?
The subject that was standing turned and took a large exaggerated step down.
And when you see that, are you closer to the back than what you showed me previously?
I was working my way up the stairs at that time.
Now, when you heard a gunshot, now you see an individual, that individual later became known to you as Mr. Oulson, is that true?
Yes, sir.
Now, once you hear that and you see that, what is it that you do? Do you go to your father, or do you do something else?
No, I went to Mr. Oulson.
Okay, tell me about that. Do you go up the stairs?
I went up the stairs to the aisle that he was standing in.
And is it fair to say that you don't remember if it was the second or the third row that you went to?
No, sir, I don't recall.
But you know it was up towards the top?
Yes.
Now, when you got there, tell me about your contact. Were you the first one to put your hands to get to Mr. Oulson?
Yes, sir.
And why did you do that? Why did you go to Mr. Oulson?
I was able to put the scene together in my training and other things. I knew what had occurred due to the series of things that I heard. So at that point, I went straight to Mr. Oulson.
And when we say you knew what occurred based on your training, are you talking about, A, you heard a gunshot,
Yes.
and then B, you saw a silhouette that was standing, now not standing? Do you agree with that or not?
Well, they were still standing at that time.
But they were moving away.
Yes, sir.
And so for that reason, you wanted to check on the person that was a silhouette that you later found out was Mr. Oulson to try to help them if they were actually shot.
Yes, sir.
So what happens when you get up there?
As the subject, as Mr. Oulson started to slump over, I had already assessed kind of the scene of what was going on.
Tell me about that. What did you assess?
One, I'm making sure that somebody doesn't have a weapon, so that it's safe to actually go hands-on. As he started to slump over, I grabbed onto both of his wrists.
Okay, you wanted to make sure that Mr. Oulson didn't have a weapon?
Sustained.
Agree or disagree? You wanted to see whether Mr. Oulson had a weapon? Do you agree with that?
Initially, yes.
Okay. And so then you said, did you not, yes or no, that you put your hands on Mr. Oulson?
Yes.
Now, what did you do at that point?
I ordered somebody in the aisle to help me place him on the ground.
Okay, and did somebody help you do that?
Yes.
Once Mr. Oulson was on the ground, is he on the ground in kind of the rows between the seats?
Yes, sir.
So is he towards the aisle or not quite there yet?
His head was away from the aisle.
But he wasn't in the aisle where the stairways are?
No, sir.
Okay. And so what happens now once you get there? Do you try to render first aid to Mr. Oulson?
Yes.
Tell me what you do.
I immediately lifted the shirt up that he was wearing, pushed the shirt up to see where he was wounded. Once I saw a bullet hole, or what I knew to be a bullet hole in his left chest, I used the same shirt that I had lifted up to kind of like ball it up over the wound and then place direct pressure on it. Then I started speaking to Mr. Oulson.
Now, before that happened, after you heard the shot, did you hear your dad say anything else?
No, sir.
You're there with Mr. Oulson and you're applying, it sounds like, just yes or no, were you applying pressure to the wound? Is that what you were doing?
Yes, sir.
And why were you doing that?
To try to limit the bleeding.
Do you have training in first aid?
Yes, sir.
And so what happens next? You're there rendering aid, is that right?
Yes, sir.
And what do you do?
I was just speaking to Mr. Oulson, trying to keep him looking at me, and stated, keep breathing, look at me, you're going to be okay. I continued to talk to him.
And did you apply any sort of chest compression, CPR, any of that sort of thing?
No, sir, he was still breathing.
And so at some point, do you leave Mr. Oulson?
Someone handed me either a shirt or a sweatshirt or something, and I used that to place over the wound. Then somebody notified me that there was a nurse present. And then not until the person who stated they were a nurse did I move out of my position and let them get to him.
So when you left Mr. Oulson, where did you go?
I went up to the aisle that my parents were in.
And at that time, could you see your father
Yes,
and your mother?
yes.
And why is that? Were the lights different? Or tell me how it was you can see them now and you couldn't see them before?
I was much closer, and the ambient lighting within the theater had started to come back on.
Okay. And ambient lighting, what do you mean by that?
Something was on the screen.
Now, once you get to the row your parents are, going down the row, who do you come to first, your mom or your dad?
It would have been my mother first.
And was she sitting right next to your dad?
I don't believe so.
Agree or disagree that she was, maybe 2 or 3 seats away?
Somewhere in that general area.
And so what do you do first? You get to the area where your parents are, who do you go to first?
I went to my father.
Now, tell me what was going on with your father. Did you look at him?
My initial thing was to secure the firearm, so I asked him where the gun was.
And where was the gun?
He stated a deputy, off-duty deputy, that was standing next to him.
Did your father tell you anything else?
I don't recall.
Objection, hearsay.
Sustained.
Now, when your father was sitting there, did you observe his face and his head?
Not directly, I saw that he had his hand on his face.
When you say hand on his face, are you talking about his face, his cheek, or somewhere on his face?
I can't recall the exacts. It was either on his cheek, on his face, and I'm not sure exactly.
And do you remember which hand?
No, sir.
And was he holding his face?
Kind of his cheek, his face, and that, it seemed, I don't know how to describe it, and I don't recall which hand it was exactly.
Now, your father wore glasses back then? Did
Yes,
he?
sir.
All right. And did you notice his glasses? Were they straight on his head or not?
No, sir.
How were they?
One of the lenses would have been out of alignment from where you could actually see through it.
And what do you mean by that?
They were sitting crooked on his face.
So that one of the lenses wasn't covering one of his eyes? Is that what you're describing?
Yes, sir.
Do you remember which side was up or down?
No, sir.
Now, at that point, you're dealing with your father, you've looked at him. Do you do anything else in terms of your father at that point?
No, sir.
Do you say anything else to your father at that point?
I think the only thing I stated to them is I needed to go get cleaned up, then to get my mom out of the theater.
Now, let's talk about that. Cleaned up, why did you have to get cleaned up?
I had a lot of blood on my hands.
From your rescue attempt?
Yes, sir.
And so, after you go and get cleaned up first, or do you take your mother out of there?
I actually went out to go get cleaned up first.
Okay. And then what do you do next? Come back in the theater?
Yes, sir.
And what do you do once you get back in the theater?
I get my mother and take her out.
Now, when you finally reached your mother, was she crying?
She was in shock.
Okay. You don't remember if she was crying or not?
Not initially.
Okay. And then, where did you take your mother?
Into the lobby area.
Now, the lobby area, that's what, outside of the Theater 10 area you're talking about?
Yes, sir. It had been between Theater 10 and the concession stands.
Now, what's going on in that lobby area when you take your mom out?
Initially, I saw deputies responding in.
Okay. Once the deputies responded, do you have any contact with the deputies yourself?
I did state to him I was an off-duty officer and that the firearm was secured with a law enforcement officer inside the theater.
Now, when you were with your mother in the lobby, were there other people that were within the theater that were out in the lobby?
People that had been in the same theater with us, yes.
And were there tables? Describe what it's like out there.
They're small round table. I believe they're small tables.
Now, at some point, did you see, you're a police officer, so you know what this is, witness forms.
Yes, sir.
Did you see those forms being handed out to the individuals that were in the lobby?
Yes, sir.
Now, I know you were caring for your mother. Did you hear people that were congregating in the lobby discussing what they thought had happened in the movie theater?
We were initially trying to sit at one of the small tables, and when people sat down with their forms and were discussing it, I told my mother we needed to move.
But did you overhear that?
Yes, they were discussing the incident.
Now, is it fair to say, agree or disagree, you actually heard people saying something to the effect of, this was over popcorn?
Yes, sir.
Now, at that point, was your mother crying?
Yes.
Was she shaking?
Yes, sir.
Once the forms were handed out to the other people, you described that you moved your mother away. What's the next thing that happened? Did the police interview your mother?
They took us to another room, away from the rest of the people.
And were you both in the same room?
Initially, we were both seated in the same room, yes.
Now, at some point, do you get separated?
Yes,
And why is that?
for separate interviews.
So who gets interviewed first, your mother or you?
I don't recall.
Now, when your mother gave her interview, you were not present for that.
No, sir.
When you gave your interview, was your mother present for that?
I don't believe so.
Now, when you give your interview, tell me about that. Do you draw any kind of diagram? Do you try to provide aid? Tell me about your interview.
I provided a statement to what I observed, and they asked me to draw a diagram of where I was at and where I thought Mr. Oulson was at, and I drew a diagram on a piece of paper.
And once you gave that interview, what's the next thing that happened? Me and my mother stayed there while they were conducting their investigation until we were released. All right. And so then you don't have any other observations? There's nothing else that happened at the theater that day?
The only other thing that was a little bit strange to me, which they stopped, was initially they were going to tow my mother's car, and when I spoke to the detective, he changed that. They did not tow her car.
And so did you take your mother home?
Yes, sir.
Okay. May I have a moment, Judge?
You may.
May I approach the clerk?
You may.
Nothing further, thank you.
Thank you. Cross?
Yes, Your Honor. Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
I'm going to discuss your direct examination that you just gave. I'm going to go kind of topic by topic. May not be in the order that you discussed it with Mr. Michaels, so in fairness to you, I'll tell you what topic we're going to talk about, and then you'll know where we're at, all right?
Yes, sir.
I'd like to begin with the last topic that Mr. Michael discussed with you about when you went out into the lobby and you saw two people sitting at the table and they were, you said, discussing what?
The incident,
What did they say?
something about popcorn.
Something about popcorn. All right. Let me ask you this. You would agree with me that when you go to a football game, maybe 50,000 people all around the stadium, and you remember Doug Flutie's pass, the miracle pass, and it just went all the way down, and the guy caught it in the end zone? Remember
No,
that?
sir.
Before your time? Good grief, I just aged myself. Okay, let me talk about something else then. You're at the football game, and you see a kickoff, and then there's a kickoff return from yard number 1 all the way down to the end, okay? Would you agree with me that the people inside the stadium all had an opportunity to see the run from one end to the other?
Yes,
Do you
sir.
agree with that? Would you agree?
That's in a lit stadium, but yes, in a stadium.
During the
they would.
day, Tampa Bay Stadium, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, it's hot, everyone's looking, watching the game. Here this guy runs 100 yards all the way down. Everyone's watching that event. You would agree, because that's something that just doesn't happen all the time, right?
It doesn't fit the context.
What doesn't?
If you're trying to liken this to what occurred in the theater, No.
Answer my question.
In a football stadium, yes.
In a football stadium, if one person received the kickoff and he went 100 yards all the way down, that would be something that doesn't happen all the time, correct?
Yes, sir.
All right? And the people, because it doesn't happen all the time, they would be watching that event as it took place. You would agree with that, right?
Yes.
And all of them would have an opportunity to see that event, correct?
Yes.
All right. Now, the people are leaving the football stadium, and two people are talking, hey, did you see that guy run 100 yards? Yeah, I saw the guy run 100 yards. If they both had the opportunity to see it, would you discount that the fact that they actually saw it just because they were talking about it?
Not in a football stadium.
My question is, would you discount the fact that they both said, I saw the guy run from one end to the other just because they were talking about it?
No, not in a
All right.
stadium.
We're going to talk about January 13th, 2014. Now, you showed up casually dressed, correct?
Yes, sir.
Kind of a polo shirt, kind of loose fitting that you wore out, so it was kind of around your pockets. Remember that?
I'm not sure what I had on.
A light color shirt with stripes across. You have a shirt like that, right?
I might have back then. If you say I did, I haven't seen a picture of me wearing
All right.
it, but I'm sure
Now-
I probably did.
You indicated to us that you approached Mr. Oulson, you applied your hands to his chest, you got blood on your hands, right?
Yes, sir.
Then after you performed that, you went up to where your mom and dad were, you had a brief conversation, then you left.
Yes,
Remember
sir.
that? And because you had to clean up, right?
Yes.
And you remember when you turned to go and leave, you wouldn't get blood on anyone. You kind of left like this, so you wouldn't get blood on anybody else, right? You remember that?
I don't recall.
You saying it didn't happen, or you just don't recall?
I don't recall.
At the time that you're at the bottom of the stairs and the previews are going, you're telling us that it was near pitch black. Remember that testimony?
Yes, sir.
Right. And then when you looked up to see where your folks were, it was pitch black and you couldn't see where your mom and dad were. Remember that?
Yes, before the preview started.
All right. Then during the direct examination, you indicated to Mr. Michaels, did you not, that when the previews came on, you looked around and saw that everybody else was paying attention to the previews just like you were. You remember that testimony?
I didn't want to interrupt people. Yes, sir.
When you looked back and you saw people watching the theater, you said they were watching, and then you turned around to watch just like they were. You remember that testimony?
Yes, sir.
All right, so you could see those people. You could see their faces, could you not?
People around me, yes.
Now, let's talk about your contact with Mr. Oulson. You said something that really, really struck home. I want to discuss it with you. When you went up there and you came up to Mr. Oulson, you began to place hands on him, and you said you ordered people to place him on the ground. Those were your words, correct?
Before I was on the floor.
You ordered people to place him on the ground. That's what you told us.
Yes, sir.
All right? So at that point, you went into police mode, did you not?
Yes, I didn't want him to fall.
All right? And you ordered people to do it. You expected them to carry out your order, didn't you?
One person. Yes.
You expected them to carry out your order, didn't you?
Yes, sir.
And that's what police officers expect, whether they're on duty or off duty. If you order someone to do it, you expect them to do it. And that's what your mindset at the time.
Regulations improper.
Overruled.
Judge, can we object, can we
Sure.
approach? Let's talk about the hunting trip. That was a week before January 13th. 13th was a Monday, January 13th. So there was a weekend the week before. That's when the hunting trip was?
I don't recall the exact dates of the trip.
Was it within a week of the incident?
Yes, sir.
Because you indicated that you were home washing up your truck from the hunting trip when you got the call to go to the movies. That's
Yes,
what I was
sir.
asking.
Yes.
All right. So you recall now the hunting trip was at least a week before?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Let's talk about that. Mr. Michaels asked you about going out into the woods. You drove down I'll call it a service road, Forest Service road, a dirt road, right?
Yes, sir.
And then you would park.
Yes.
Then you would walk into the woods.
Yes.
Now, in North Florida, the sand's kind of like sugar sand, isn't it?
The area we were hunting was not sugar sand.
What was it?
It was just dirt.
Dirt? Any clay down? Red clay like we see in Georgia?
Not in Georgia, no. This was
So
just
dirt.
muddy. Yeah, a little bit of clay, but not the red clay.
Right. What kind of foliage was it? Is it pine trees up there, oak trees?
It's a mix of everything.
Well, what is the mix of everything?
Pines and oaks.
Okay, so pines and oaks. Pine needles on the ground,
I'm sure there were.
oak leaves on the ground?
Yes, sir.
It's in December, right?
Beginning of January, yes.
Okay, kind of winter when leaves start to fall off trees, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, in that area, you have to navigate because there is no trail. You just pick your own trail, right?
The property we were hunting on actually had a lot of little roads you couldn't even drive on, so you could walk in.
Single track or double track?
Some were double trapped, some were single.
All right. And you would walk in the dirt part?
Yes, sir.
And then, but you don't hunt from those tracks. You get out into the woods so the deer can't see you, right?
When you go down those, some of those tracks actually are good spots to hunt.
All right, so you would set up your blind and put your chair right on one of those tracks?
Sometimes, yes.
Okay. Now, let's talk about this tree stand. It's a climbing tree stand. It's a climbing sit stand, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. It's two pieces,
Yes.
approximately 18, 19 pounds.
Yes, sir.
Now, Mr. Michaels talked to you a little bit about it. There's a section that's for your feet,
Yes, sir.
and there's a platform for your feet.
Yes,
right?
sir.
There's Velcro straps that you put your toes in, right?
A form of straps, yes.
Yeah, former straps. Then it comes out and circles a little bit with little teeth so you grab into the tree, right?
Yes, sir.
Then there's the cable that you have to go around the tree and hook to it, right?
Yes, sir.
Then the second part is where you actually put your bottom and you use your arms, right? It's just kind of the same thing. There's
Yes,
a
sir.
strap that goes around the tree, right?
Yes, sir.
And there's this little notches that'll stick into the tree.
Yes.
Okay. let's do this. I know this is a chair, but the purpose of this is just twofold. Because I can't elevate myself, all right? If your feet are on the platform and the straps are in, all right, we're going to take this one step at a time, all right? And it's hooked to the tree, right? In order to inch this up, you actually bring your both feet up, right?
No, sir. It's hard to describe. The seat you're sitting on is it's permeable, it's not solid. So you can move.
I understand that, and I said, I understand this is a chair, and I understand the seat is actually on the second part.
Yes.
Okay, but I'm just trying to get the movement of the feet so I don't fall down.
You
So
don't
you pull them
have,
both up.
you don't have to bring above 90 degrees with your feet. The seat section on the top section is actual cloth, so it allows your butt to rotate. So you only have to go from a standing position to only bringing your knees maybe to a 45 degree. You don't have to bring your knees all the way up to 90 degrees to bring the base up.
All right. So if you're like this and you're standing, right?
Yes, sir.
All right, now I'm going to, like I'm on the seat, you still have to bring them up.
You bring them up a little bit, yes.
Yeah, in order to come up. And you come up maybe 6 inches or so?
You can do it from 1 inch to a foot if you have the ability.
Okay. So you bring them up using your hip flexors and your back and your stomach muscles, your core muscles to bring it up.
Yes, sir.
All right. Now, once it's up in that position, then you have to use the same muscles to stand up.
You stand up, yes, sir.
All right. Then you have to move the second part.
Yes,
right?
sir.
And the second part, with the wrap around the tree, you actually pick it up using your forearm, your biceps, your shoulders, and you pick it straight up, right?
Yes, sir.
And then you hook it into the tree,
Yes.
right? And then the process begins all over again.
Yes.
All right. So the muscles that you're using as far as going up and down, you're using your hip flexors, your core, your back to pull up. You stand up, and then you're using your forearms, biceps, and shoulders to pick it up, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And your father went up about 10 feet in that tree, right?
Yes, sir.
And if you're only going up, let's make the math easy, okay? You're only going up 6 inches at a time. You're going to do that, what, more than 20 times to get up 10 feet.
Yes, sir.
Okay. But then you got to come down, right?
Yes, sir.
And it's just the reverse process.
Yes.
All right, so it's another 20 times that you have to come back down. Right?
Yes.
Okay. Now, your father chose to do that approximately 1 week before this incident, correct?
Yes.
All right. And it was his choice to use that process to go 10 feet up a tree.
Yes, sir.
Okay. He didn't say, you know, son, I've assessed this situation, and because of the way my body is right now, I just don't feel comfortable doing it. If I fall, maybe I won't recover. There's no apprehension on his part based on his physical ability to perform that task that he related to you.
He didn't need to.
Did he relate to you, no, I don't want to do this because of my physical condition, I just don't feel comfortable doing it? He never said that, right?
No.
He just hooked up the apparatus to the tree and shimmied right up that tree, didn't he?
No, sir. I hooked the stand to the tree.
What?
I put the stand on the tree.
Just put a strap around.
Yeah, I did that part of
He
it.
got into the apparatus,
Yes, sir.
and he went up the tree.
Yes.
And then once he got up the tree, he had to get his bow, right?
Yes, sir.
And it's attached to a rope.
Yes.
And so then he pulled up his bow.
Yes, sir.
And then you're facing the tree, then you turn around, and you sit down so you're facing out now, right?
Yes, sir.
And it's narrow, it's small, right?
It's not tiny. It's-
Okay, but that brings us to the next point. There's been testimony that a week later, your dad was 6'1", 6 feet 2 inches, 270 pounds. That's the man that went up that tree and sat in that tree stand, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I want to go back to your contact with your father inside the movie theater, after your contact with Mr. Oulson. I'm going to change it, all right? I told you if I went off topic, I'd give you a heads up, right?
Okay.
I've decided to go someplace else. Let's talk about when you're down the bottom of the stairs, after the shot is fired, and you see the person that you saw.
I had
Okay?
already moved up some, yes, sir.
Yes, sir. All right, let's talk about that. You indicated to us that when you looked up in this area that you've described as nearly pitch black, you were able to see someone standing, correct?
Not when I initially looked up.
As you keep going up, maybe one step or two, you see a person standing,
At the time of the shot, when the body was silhouetted, yes.
okay? And as you went up, you still saw him standing.
Yes,
All right. And then you told this jury that you saw him take an exaggerated step down. You remember that testimony?
yes, sir.
In fact, I even think he said a large exaggerated step. Right?
I know it was an exaggerated step.
Okay. So, what is that? What did you see? I know what you said. What did you see? Can you describe it? Are we coming over chairs? Are we standing in a seat and getting back down? What are we doing?
I stated there was a chance that he could have stepped down a row, but I did not know that if he did or not. He took a large step.
That's your testimony.
Yes, sir.
All right. Clearly, that's what you saw.
Yes, sir.
Like he was stepping down a row.
There was I never stated he did step down a row, but it was as if he had.
That's your description.
Yes, sir.
So the jury has it in mind like he was stepping down a row, right?
Yes, sir.
Like he was stepping off from the top of a chair, right?
Yes, sir.
That's the impression you want to leave with this juror. Yes?
Yes.
Okay. Now let's go to your contact with Mr. Oulson. You get there, that's done, then you go up a couple of steps, you turn, you go over to where your father is, and your testimony was that his glasses were askew. One of his lenses was below his eye. Remember that testimony?
Yes, sir.
All right. Now, you would agree with me, wouldn't you, that from the time you heard the shot to the time you got up there was a minute,
May have been more.
maybe even more. And when you got there, you saw the off-duty officer there standing next to him, right?
I didn't know he was at the time.
But you knew that he had the firearm.
Yes.
He told you he had the firearm.
My father told me that he had the firearm.
And while your father was sitting there and you were talking to him, and the other off-duty officer was standing there with your father, his glasses were askew and the lens was below his eye.
Yes, sir.
And the entire time that you were there, your father never took his glasses and put them back on where you're supposed to wear them, right?
I don't recall.
That's your testimony that they were askew.
Yes, sir.
You still a firearm instructor?
No, sir.
When did you lose your cert?
I let my cert go around 2011.
So in 2014, you were not a certified law enforcement firearms instructor?
Yes, sir.
You were not?
I was not.
Okay. You were up until 2011?
Around that time frame, yes, sir.
All right. And Florida Department of Law Enforcement has a specific course that you go through in order to be a certified law enforcement firearm instructor.
Yes, sir.
40-hour course.
Yes.
All right. And in that course, you're taught to to not only be proficient as to determining whether or not an officer has met the Florida standards for proficiency,
Your Honor,
but
irrelevant and beyond the scope of the
No.
right.
no, it's not. I mean, we can come to the bench, but
I'll give you a little leeway. Overruled for now.
you're also taught to make sure that the range is safe, right?
Yes, sir.
As an instructor.
Irrelevant?
Judge, can we approach?
Yeah, come on.
Prior to 2013, did you have an occasion to go to Shooter's World with your dad?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And you've been with him when he had shot his pistol and his revolver?
Yes.
Okay. Now, your father, your sister testified suffered from what, trigger finger, you know about that?
Yes, sir.
Right. And the finger just locks up, maybe one, maybe the whole hand, right?
I know a couple fingers.
Okay. Does that ever cause you any concern when you're at the range or out hunting with your dad while he's handling a firearm, that his hand might just lock up and make the gun
It's
go off?
not the sense of locking up as in contracting. It's more of he can't bend it.
And that contracting is what pulls the trigger, right?
Yes, sir.
Redirect?
All right. Now, the prosecutor asked you questions framed by, well, is that your testimony? Is that your testimony? Yes or no? Is your idea of testimony telling the truth?
Yes, sir.
Your Honor, I object.
Sustained.
How about this? Is your idea of testimony giving answers to the questions as you know those answers to be?
Same
Yes.
objection.
Sustained.
Okay, let me ask you this. Now, the prosecutor talked to you about climbing, your dad climbing a tree with a tree stand. Remember that part?
Yes, sir.
Were you or were you not present sometime after January 13th, 2014, and today, where your mother having
Your Honor,
actually...
I object. Relevant.
Approach.
Before my father had one.
All right. And was it hard for you to use?
Your Honor, I object.
Overruled.
It's not relevant as far as 402, Judge, and 403.
I'll allow a couple
May we
of
approach?
questions. All right, come on.
Back to the tree stand. You had a tree stand first, is that what you said?
That brand, yes.
All right, and did you buy one for your father?
I don't recall if I bought it, but it was a replacement for an older style that was much heavier.
All right, so was it a lighter model?
Yes, much lighter.
And being lighter, I imagine that no matter who used it, that it would be easier to use than a heavier one.
Your Honor,
Sustained.
Okay. By lighter, do you mean it weighs less?
Weighs less and it's easier to use.
Okay. So is that the model that your father used on that hunting trip?
Yes.
I don't have anything else, thank you.
Thank you. May this witness be released?
No, Your Honor, he's under my subpoena.
All right, very good. Counsel approach. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we've reached a stopping point for the day. So I'm going to go ahead and let you go. Enjoy your weekend. Remember my instructions. Be very careful, please. No news, no discussions, no internet searches. Just be very mindful, and should you get exposed to something, please make note of, telling me, and but look away or shut it off immediately, okay? All right. Any questions? We'll start at 8:30 Monday, all right? So be here a little early, like whatever you guys have to do with the clerk in the morning, and then we'll get started. All right? Thank you all very much. Have a great weekend.